Hello, everybody. My name is Leah, and I am the administrative assistant here with Africa Fire Mission. And this is just part of our weekly training today. We are going to be recording this session and posting it on our YouTube channel for later viewing. We invite you all to share that video with your colleagues or just look at it for later viewing and just if you ever want to review the material. We are also going to be offering certificates today if you attend at least 75% of this training. So that is more than 45 minutes of the training, and we will be emailing you a certificate afterwards. And then please feel free at any time if you have questions to unmute yourself and ask those questions. We always invite that. And then today, sadly, our fire safety advocate, Jose, is not with us today. And so he will not be hosting tea time. But it looks like we do have Richard here in our chat. Chief Richard, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. How are you?
Oh, perfect. I'm good. How are you?
Fine, thank you. How are you doing?
Well, we are actually blessed to have Chief Richard here with us today. So he's going to be taking place of Jose. He's going to be offering our word of encouragement and then a little bit of tea time afterwards as well. So could I pass this off to you, Richard, just to have this word of encouragement real fast?
Thank you. A word of encouragement. I wanted us to look at our daily fire stations, how we do things on our fire stations. If, for example, like in the county, in Kenya, but all in one, we come in hand to do the same thing. We might find our times or ourselves working in very different fire departments, very different things. We do different things, but we have one common goal. Today we're going. I will just tell people to, if you have your Bible, you can read Acts 4. Verse 23 to 31, but I will read verse 31. It's where I want us to focus on. And when they prayed and praised, in which they were gathered together and was shaken, speak with the gods. They continue to speak the word of God in boldness. This means, like in our different situation, in our different fire stations, we converge so that we can work against one goal, which is to save lives, to save property, and also to prevent further damages in our situation, in our places. So as the Lord Jesus came to our world, we need to unite. And he also encourages us to continue with the good work of Christianity, spreading the gospel as we always do. Firefighting is just a calling, and it's something that comes from you, because you can imagine someone people are running away from the fire and you are getting into the fire. You always, it requires the courage. It requires there's something from you that is pushing you to do such particular work. So today, I want us to focus more on everything that we do, every positive that we give, no matter how much people think we don't work. Maybe they always say, like, sometimes we are racing around, sleeping around the stations, like maybe not always busy, not always doing a lot of things, but they don't know the challenges that we face. Wearing the fireman tunic, wearing the boots, wearing the helmet, it costs so much. Going into a fire, saving that kid, saving that man, that woman, saving everyone and properties from further damage, it really requires a lot of much. So in that, maybe we want us to do a short prayer so that we can start our class today. Thank you, our Heavenly Father. We come before you this afternoon, God. As we start the class today, we pray that, God, that you give us, that you may shine us, that you may give us the power to move on, no matter what happens in our life, God. Even the class of today, as we're going to read about firefighter health in Jehovah, We ask you to be with us to protect everyone, protect every firefighter, protect whoever our families back at home. In the mighty name of Jesus, we pray and believe. Amen. So it's back to you, Ria.
Thank you so much for that, Richard. That was very encouraging. I know that it's oftentimes so difficult to balance perception and the way people view you and what you actually do. And I know you guys all do so much for your communities. And so I want to thank you all, and especially thank you, Richard, for sharing today. But I want to introduce everybody to our presenter today, Russell Osgood. He's going to be presenting today about firefighter cancer awareness. So I'm going to pass it off to you, Russ, and you can get started.
Okay, great. Let me share my screen here. Find the right one. Okay, everybody see the screen? You see it, Leah? Okay, great. All right, well, welcome. My name is Russell Osgood, and I am the Vice President of Education for the Firefighter Cancer Support Network. I'm also a fire chief in a small town in Maine, in Ogunquit, Maine. So it's very cold where I am. So I'm hoping that you folks are nice and toasty and warm, and you're going to enjoy this. So I started out as a firefighter in 1985. So I've been doing this a little while. This lady that you see here on the screen is Sarah Fox. She died of occupational cancer, and I want to talk today a little bit about occupational cancer in the fire service. So in the US, we've been doing a lot of research and coming up with protocols and preventative methods to reduce our risks for several health things that we see in the fire service. So we'll talk about that as we go through this. So cancer in the fire service is something that has come to the forefront in the past probably 15 years. And it's always been a little bit of an issue, but we know that cancer is caused by hundreds of different things. And what happens is there's a genetic modification to a cell that creates this cancer in our bodies. It can happen from a host of things. It could be genetics, meaning your age or family risk or things of that nature. The number one cause of cancer worldwide, of course, is tobacco use, smoking, and chewing tobacco and things like that. Our diets and obesity rates play a role. Our environmental exposures play a role. Alcohol plays a role, and as well as our exposure to the sun plays a role. So those things we'll talk about in a little bit, but in the United States, we have a presumptive legislation or a death benefit for firefighters. And that report shows that a majority of the time, firefighters are dying from a heart attack. So cardiac problems is the majority of the reason why firefighters die in the US, according to the US Fire Administration. And this report that you see here is from 2019. And although we have a lot of tragic events that lead to the death of firefighters, it does show that some of the health things that we are exposed to that create cardiac issues or cancer are leading the charge here. So we turned to the International Association of Firefighters, and we looked at their statistics for career firefighters, and we see a different story. We see cancer becomes the top cause of occupational death among firefighters. So that changed the discussion a little bit for us back in 2013 is when we started looking at this real close. And we developed a few programs, and we're going to talk about both cardiovascular and cancer risk because they're two things that we can modify a lot of what we do, and we can put some things into place to reduce both of those with the hope that we reduce the deaths for both by doing that. So these are going to be some skills that you can use. Some of them are simple and some of them are kind of complicated, but it's about chipping away as we go. So research shows us this. We know that in the United States, 40% of the general population will be diagnosed with cancer at some point in their lifetime. But we also know that firefighters have a 9% higher risk of being diagnosed with cancer and a 14% higher risk of dying from cancer based on the research that we see, and that's above the general population. So that's a sobering statistic that we want to chip away at those two numbers. So we're no higher than the general population. In fact, it'd be nice if we could get below the general population. So research in the US and across the world really shows that we have some certain cancers that we have issues with in the fire service, and the list here is a part of it, but there's a lot of these cancers. These are all above the general population, and if we look at multiple studies together, we see that more than one study on several occasions indicates the same thing or very similar risks. And this has allowed researchers to say that yes, these cancers, the ones that we see on this chart, are the ones that are affecting our firefighters greatly. And when we think of things like malignant melanoma, you know, that's something that when we talk later on about early detection, it's probably highly preventable. So some of these are not, but some are, and we can definitely do things to reduce the risk of getting these cancers from occupational exposures or from firefighting. Back in 2013, the Firefighter Cancer Support Network brought a whole bunch of people into a room, a lot smarter than I am, to have discussions around what is leading to this, what are the problems here that we're seeing, and how do we fix it? And they came up with a couple things. One was that cancer is the top cause of firefighter line of duty deaths. And until that time, we really hadn't said that. So I wanted to point that out. And then that it was under-recognized as a health and safety risk for firefighters, not just here, but across the world. And I think that's changing a little bit. And I know that in different parts of the world, things are much more difficult with some of these things that we're going to talk about. But if we know up front that we have this little bit extra risk, we can do some simple things to reduce it. So the U.S. Fire Administration and NIOSH got together with all the other folks, and we started this national registry. And the reason I wanted to talk about this real quick with you folks is not that you'll be joining it, but it's going to give us a better understanding of the data behind this. So in the next few months, U.S. firefighters are going to start enrolling in this firefighter registry, and it's going to ask a bunch of health questions, and it's going to allow researchers to have additional information that they can use to get a better handle on all kinds of subjects related to firefighting. So it's a good thing. And if we can reproduce this on a global level, it would be wonderful, but that's going to take a lot of time. Do we have some questions yet? No. Okay. I just saw some chat stuff there. All right, so routes of exposure. Let's talk about that real quickly. So a number of ways that there's a number of ways that we get exposed to these toxicants, and that's through the exposure to heat, smoke, and just the products of combustion, basically. And we can get it through inhalation, ingestion, absorption. Those are the three major things that we see in firefighters as the way to get it. It's just like any drug, right? If you're taking a pill, you're ingesting it. If you're using an inhaler, you're inhaling it. And if it's a topical ointment, you're absorbing it. And so that stuff gets into our bloodstream. The toxins that we're exposed to on fire scenes get into our bloodstream just like any other drug. And unfortunately, some of the toxins are very carcinogenic that get there, that end up there. So these are the routes of exposure is still there, but we know that some short duration, high intensity exposures can be very dangerous. So we really want to avoid those. And this little toxic soup of known carcinogens that we see here, these are all in fire smoke. And then there's more, and we're going to talk about those in just a second. And I'll talk about where they come from. And that's where we start with occupational exposures. So occupational exposures are basically the stuff that you get exposed to through firefighting, right? So that comes in the form of particularly fire smoke or the gases from the combustion of burning products. And those burning products can be anything from wood to plastics or chemicals or pesticides, or there's a number of things. But all of the there's well over 400 compounds in fire smoke, and just the ones that you see on the screen, there is just a small sampling of some of the toxic stuff that we're exposed to. And at the top, you see carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide highlighted. And that's because in the US, we do a lot of air monitoring. I don't know if you do that there, but it's one of the skills that we use, or we've been using for years. And we use a 4-gas detector, and we're looking for carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide, oxygen, and H2S, hydrogen sulfide in fire smoke. And the problem with that is that there's really no correlation between those 4 things, or the 2 things that we see here, and all the other compounds. So they're all dangerous. And if we're only testing for a few of them, it's not helping us understand what we're being exposed to. And there's really no good way to test for all of them. So what we like to say is we need to just be cautious and take protective actions against all of it. So pinpointing where we get these exposures is really tough, right? It's not something that is simple because we have a ton of exposures. A lot of times we think of I'll go back, when we think of this fire in the bottom left-hand corner, a building fire, a structure fire as being the big culprit of all of our exposures. And unfortunately, that is one of the avenues, but unfortunately we have a lot of little exposures that create particular problems for us. One of those is that the pot on the stove. I know my time traveling the world, cooking indoors, and being exposed to smoke over a long period of time creates a particular respiratory problem for a lot of people. And it's the same thing for us. If we go to a kitchen fire, and this is something that we do a lot here in the US, is people leave unattended pots on stoves, they get burning, they create really toxic smoke. We go into that room and we don't protect ourselves the way we should. So we have this small exposure. But the problem is these small exposures over time build up in our system. So that one structure fire that we may go to, we might go to 10 of those a year. We could do 30 to 50 of these types of fires and have the same level of exposure. So it's important to protect ourselves at all costs at any level of exposure. Diesel exhaust has been a big culprit for over a long period of time. So we want to limit our exposure to diesel exhaust, both because it's linked to a lot of cancers and cardiovascular disease. And we'll talk more about that as we go. Car fires for cars, they're really produced with a lot of plastics now. There's a lot of chemicals involved, and the off-gassing is deadly. So we want to think about our exposure levels there. And as you can see in these pictures, no air packs are being utilized, no SCBA being utilized during that car fire, which leads to exposures that are unnecessary. And then dumpster fires. I know here in the US, this dumpster was burning roofing material or asphalt, which is highly carcinogenic. And you just never know what's in a dumpster. It's trash, and you could call it a trash fire as well. The products of combustion coming off that are very toxic. And then one thing that's come to light in the last few years, or it's been around for a while, is the fact that biomass fuels are found to have carcinogenic compounds. So in the US, we have a lot of wildland urban interface fires that aren't particularly just burning like this picture is burning sagebrush. It could be, several houses involved, but that smoke is toxic. And unfortunately, it's difficult to protect yourself because of the nature of how we fight those fires. it's tough to protect yourself, but it's something that we need to think of as an exposure. And then recently that's come to light in our region is the use of AFFF foams and the PFAS, the fluorinated substances that protect us from getting our gear wet, or their water repellents and flame retardants that are in our gear. They were in a lot of other things, and they've been there since the 50s. These PFAS compounds are found to have links to several cancers, and there's steps to reduce the exposures as we go along here and changing the way we do things here in the US, like no more AFFF foam. We're reducing the use of our gear unless it's necessary, things of that nature. So this test was to demonstrate that our gear does provide some level of protection to smoke, but it doesn't provide a complete level of protection. And quite frankly, we're never going to have 100% protection. There is an inherent risk to firefighting, one that we all accept because we know that it's a calling, and but there's things that we can do. So this fluorescent aerosol test here took this gentleman, put him in a chamber. They put a UV tracer dye into the atmosphere while he was in there. He did typical firefighting duties throughout. He did a bunch of different skills, and he moved around, and then when he came out, they put him under a black light so they could see his exposures. And as we see in the 6 photos to the right, we see what's glowing on his neck is a deposit of that aerosol, and that would be the same as a deposit of like carbon or toxicants from fire smoke. So the stuff that's left over after burning. And then on his pant legs as well. So he did have pants on, he did have bunker pants on, or a night hitch, but still he had some level of exposure. So it's important to understand that we have this exposure so that we can do some stuff to protect ourselves after the fact. And we know that it's getting into our system because we've done urine samples with firefighters at pre-fire and post-fire, and we look for polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons in that, which is something that is in just about every fire. So we see that in most fire smoke, no matter where it is. And we found that they had a high potential for DNA damage, which is what creates cancer. But they were finding 3 to 5 times the amount of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons in the blood levels of firefighters, in the urine levels of firefighters after a post-fire. So we know we're getting we know we're getting a exposure through firefighting. So that confirmed it. So what can we do about it? So there's some things that we can modify, modifiable risk factors. One of those, and they come in a host of different things, all the way from what we eat to what we drink to exercise. So one of them is if you smoke, pretty simple, quit. It's probably the best thing you can do to reduce your risk. So these modifiable risk factors are things that we can do on or off the job, right? Or so at any point in time to reduce our risk for cancer, and they're going to benefit us in the long run. So we don't just talk about smoking, we also talk about tobacco use. In the US, we've seen an uptick of firefighters that are chewing tobacco. In fact, we smoke less than the general population in the United States, the firefighters do, but we're chewing tobacco, and that's kind of an issue. And vaping is another animal in there that we need to get rid of or need to reduce. So any of those tobacco products, just cut them out of your daily use if you can, or just do it. Alcohol consumption in the US is pretty high among firefighters. In fact, we see that we have a small binge drinking problem. So we see firefighters that drink 3.5 drinks a day or more quite often. But we know that we have a couple of types of cancer that are elevated in firefighters. It's colon cancer and esophageal cancer. Both have pretty higher elevations above the general population than in firefighters. And then if you look at what alcohol does to that, it increases that by another 25% for colon cancer and astronomically for esophageal cancer. So reducing alcohol consumption is a great tool to reduce your risk for cancer overall. The American Cancer Society's rule of thumb is 1 drink a day for ladies, 2 for the gentlemen. And it's not something that you can save them up and have them on the weekend or anything of that nature. It's a day-to-day thing. So reducing alcohol consumption is a great way to reduce your risk. Sunscreen, for me, you can probably tell I don't have a whole lot of hair on my head, and I get sunburns really easy, so I need to wear sunscreen all the time. If you're in and around the sun and you're getting high sun exposures, it is definitely a risk for cancer, and one that you can reduce by using sunscreen. So pretty simple tool. So nutrition is one of the things that we talk about, not just for cancer reduction or cancer risk reduction. It's also for cardiac risk reduction. What we eat and how we fuel our bodies is really important. Obesity, what we have for a diet, plays a big role. And I like this quote by Michael Pollan. He did a documentary calling In Defense of Foods. He says, eat food, not much, and mostly plants. So that would mean eat real foods, foods that aren't pre-prepared. So you're prepping your foods. They're not modified in anything. They're just real food. So not processed, less processed food. Not too much, don't overeat. That's pretty simple, right? And mostly plants. There's evidence that a diet high in vegetables, or what is considered a Mediterranean diet, is probably the best diet that we can utilize to reduce both cardiac and cancer risk in firefighters. And these are things that are easily modifiable again. And then fitness, as a firefighter, fitness is really important. We have a pretty tough job. It demands a lot of heavy work in a short amount of time, and having a fitness regimen that supports that will reduce cardiovascular risk by at least 25%, and it will lower a lot of the risks between 10 and 50%. And some of those, cancers are like colon, breast, esophageal, liver, stomach, kidney, all the ones that we see affecting firefighters are also reduced as well. So a really good tool for us is to adopt a program in our departments that allows us to train like we work, but also have fitness as well at the same time. How we sleep. In the US, we see that we have some sleep disorders. About 37% of firefighters had sleep disorders, so that's a pretty big number. And unfortunately, we see that with the lack of sleep, we see some risks. And we know that there's these natural killer cells that help fight off disease in our body, and cancer particularly. So when we sleep, our bodies are rebuilding, they're rejuvenating. That's the best thing you can do. You work out really hard and your body is sore. Sleeping helps restore your body to its normal level and get you better. So it reduces cardiovascular disease, obesity, and everything. So we're looking for people to get a pretty good, healthy night's sleep. A lot of firefighters, I sleep probably 5 hours a night. That's not enough. We need like 7 to 8. And it's something that we should really focus on, because it really does your body well. So that's one of the modifiable risk factors. So best practices, what can we do as firefighters to look at this problem? So I want to share this video first that's going to show how we demonstrated that the toxicants get from the fire scene through our firehouses or to our homes. And
hapa kwa simu hii haikubali, inazima hapa kwa simu.
Yes, question, go ahead. Do we have a question?
Could you unmute one more time and ask that question again? You cut out a little bit. Or feel free to type that in the chat too.
All right, I'm going to go ahead with the video.
Yep, go ahead.
So this is super invisible powder that's used actually for theft detection and cash. But one of the things we're trying to simulate is pretending that this is black soot, just the same type of soot that comes off combustible and burning materials you would encounter in a fire incident response. The initiative actually came to us from the Palm Beach County Fire Rescue Department. They were very interested in understanding about how what they did for work was impacting their health, specifically how maybe being a firefighter or an EMS responder may increase their risk for cancer. One of the things we're trying to do today is figure out, is there a way we can demonstrate how maybe cancerous materials are transferred from a fire incident response back to the fire station and personal vehicle. And so today was really a teaching exercise and a scientific exercise of trying to see how we demonstrate where soot, represented by this invisible dye, might be transferring from when they go to respond to a fire and come back to the fire station. So the goal today was trying to be able to identify, can we feasibly show how soot is transferred from a fire incident response back to their truck and back to the fire station. As you start going through the different scenarios of post-decon into the fire engine, back into the bunk, into the restrooms, back here to the coffee table, it starts becoming less visible to the naked eye. But that powder that is invisible over chronic exposure could be potentially causing cellular changes that we just don't know about yet. And hopefully through some of our studies, we can start identifying those changes. It was really an eye-opening experience for us because I anticipated, some demonstration of how much dye would transfer. I didn't realize the breadth and scope of how much dye would spread within the different scenarios that we were shooting in, as well as continue to transfer on after the first fire engine truck. So for me, it was very impressive to see even some of the invisible dye transfer onto the bunks where they're sleeping at night. Even if it's a smaller quantity, you could imagine that low dose chronic exposure of this dye might be potentially increasing the risk over time. We filmed today in the EMS's personal vehicle. You could easily see even fainter wisps of plume of dye on the ceiling as well as on the seat that were not direct contact but were physically visible on it, suggesting that the particulate moves around. So you might not visibly see soot, and in this case we got to see a dye, but that could potentially be increasing your cancer risk. The firefighter works as a fomite and is transferring, carcinogen from where their place of work back to their personal home. So we had an opportunity to have a child with us today to be able to demonstrate maybe what happens in passing some of that soot using a soccer ball. So we were able to have a child play with one of the EMS firefighters with that soccer ball. We were able to see second degree transfer of this invisible dye, i.e. the soot, transfer from the EMS to the soccer ball and to the child. Activities that I hope arises from this video that we're producing is that firefighters are a little bit more cognizant about how hygiene is a very important aspect, and decontamination is an important aspect of post-incident fire response, because it makes them a little bit more aware of not only of the soot that they bring back into the fire station, but also what they might be taking to their personal homes and sharing with their families through secondary and tertiary contact of this soot on their own person. And I hope that the firefighters see that as a way of creating an opportunity for awareness and discussion of how we improve hygiene and decontamination within the fire service. This is
So that is a demonstration of what how we get exposure at a fire scene. It goes back to our stations or our homes, and that's what we want to try to avoid. So there's some stuff that we can do. There's some easy steps that we're going to talk about now that we can do, and some of them we've talked about, like wearing sunscreen, not using tobacco. And let's talk about these occupational practices that we can do to reduce our risk. So fire station design has been one of the things that we've talked about here in the US, and I know this is an expensive, difficult process, but what we'd like to try to see is that we have areas where we keep this dirty stuff. We have an area where we can clean, and we have an area where none of that crosses over. So basically like a hazmat, we have a hot zone, a warm zone, and a cold zone. And I know that even here in the US, this is difficult for many departments because it requires an enormous commitment of finances and time and energy to make this work. So we can just think about those things, like not having our gear in our bunk rooms or in our houses or where we live when it's dirty. So that's a good place to start. So let's talk about some of those other things. So one of the big things is when we're at a fire, we want to wear our air supply, our SCBA, as often as possible. In fact, we should be wearing it from the beginning of fire attack to the end of overhaul, which basically means that the entire incident you're wearing your air pack to reduce your exposure to fire smoke. Because we've seen and we know fire smoke has a lot of toxins in it. We want to reduce that. Now, there is an inherent risk that you're going to get the stuff on your skin. We saw that. So by protecting our lungs from that, we only have that skin exposure. We eliminate the respiratory exposure, which is good. So now we're reducing it. So the fact that 20 minutes of exposed to burning wood can equal about a pack of cigarettes. So that means that, we need to protect ourselves. So our thing is from the beginning of fire attack to the end of overhaul. The best practice of reducing your exposure to diesel exhaust starts in the station with an exhaust collection system. In the US here, we have what they call an extractor or a Plymavent or a Magnaflux device that it basically is a fan that collects the diesel exhaust to the tailpipe and exhausts it. And I know that that's not a practical solution everywhere. It's the best case scenario, but I teach this to a lot of rural fire departments here in the US that don't have the funding to do this. And what we tell them is to leave the doors open so it's not in the station. Try not to run the truck inside the building. Drive it right out, get it outside so you're not contaminating the environment constantly. It takes some time for the diesel exhaust to get out of the building after you start the truck. So leave the door open a little longer if you can, and just to reduce that risk. Clean cab design is something that is happening here a lot in the US. And this is another expensive, difficult way to reduce your exposures. But the concept is really good. The concept is that you keep the cab of your truck as clean as possible, meaning that when you go to a fire, you do get exposed. You reduce that by not putting your dirty stuff back in the cab, and you also clean that cab following the fire with, wet cloths or, get all that stuff out. That so when you're responding to other calls that aren't fires, you're not re-exposing yourself to the toxins that are left in that cab from bringing all your dirty and contaminated stuff back to the station. And if you do have the finances and you can buy a clean cab apparatus, that's great. And those things are like non-porous surfaces. The air packs aren't stored in the cab. Only clean gear is allowed in the cab. There's a filtered ventilation systems, and when you place the truck and pump, the windows automatically roll up so the smoke from the fire scene doesn't get in there and the diesel exhaust doesn't get in there. So there's a lot of neat things that you can do, but again, it's a costly thing, and a simple solution is just to keep your cab as clean as possible. That makes it really easy. One of the recommendations is that, we know that the soot, we saw from that video that the soot is getting on our stuff and being transported around. And in fact, the soot is just as dangerous as the smoke. And what used to be, in the US, really dirty gear was a sign of pride and commitment in the fire service. That's not so much anymore. It actually represents something that's a little frightening. So now clean is the new cool is what they're kind of saying. And that means not taking your dirty equipment anywhere, and definitely not storing your protective equipment in the living areas in your station, in your home, if you can help it, and not transporting any contaminated gear in your personal vehicles, if possible. So let's talk about exposure reduction. So this is after the fire. Those are best practices. Let's talk about what happens after you're exposed. So after you're exposed, we like to set up similar to a hazmat zone where we have a hot zone where you're exiting a burning building or a contaminated area, a warm zone where you can start to clean yourself off, reduce those hazards, and then a cold zone where you have rehab, medical monitoring, and all of that good stuff. Within that warm zone, we see that firefighters should remain on air, and we know through research that you can reduce the exposure you can reduce your exposure by approximately 85% by using wet decon. So that's the best practice, is wet decon, and it works pretty well. Again, it reduces surface exposures by about 85%. And that really is simply using a hose that is mounted to the fire apparatus and rinsing off your gear with soap and water. As part of that decon process, we also recommend that you use some type of a wet wipe, a baby wipe, soap and water, and wash your skin. Where we saw that fluorescent aerosol screening test, and we saw the exposure on the neck and legs and stuff, wash that stuff off as soon as you can. And then we go to our gear. Our gear needs to be cleaned and washed and decontaminated. So we recommend that you bag that stuff on scene to bring it back to your station to clean. And I don't know what your cleaning practices are. We'll talk about that after this, and I have a video that's going to put all this together. So bagging your gear, here in the US, we found using black trash bags was a bad idea because people threw stuff away. So we recommend using a clear trash bag just to seal it up. So this is a short video from the University of Miami that goes over that decon process, and this is kind of the best practice that we like to see, and we'll play that now.
Every firefighter knows a fellow firefighter that is either dealing with cancer or who has lost their battle with cancer. We see these most aggressive cancers in the fire service happening at a much younger age than the general population. The fires that burn today are much more volatile and hazardous than they were 20 years ago. Science has proven that materials that burn today contain carcinogens that are directly linked to firefighter cancer.
Essentially, today's fires put us at greater risk than 20 years ago. We cannot stand idle while our brothers and sisters die.
Since 2015, the Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center has been studying this risk. We know that exposure to that is harmful to your health.
And what they have discovered is that when we leave the fire scene, we bring the threat home with us.
It's in your clothes, it's in the cab, it's in the firehouse, and for many of you, you bring it home to your family.
Because of discoveries by the Firefighter Cancer Initiative, we are changing our approaches to decon processes. These are all steps that we must take to reduce soot and dangerous compounds out the fire scene, lowering our exposure to known cancer hazards.
To you, this may seem like simple cleaning practices, but when done regularly and consistently, our research has shown that your risk and exposures have decreased significantly.
This firefighter did not engage in the decontamination practices and will be emitting carcinogens for the next 4 to 8 hours. Everyone that they come into contact with, including themselves and the public, is at risk. This firefighter completed the on-scene decontamination procedures and has reduced their risk by 85%.
Transition our fire service is going through today is similar to what we saw in the late 1980s with communicable disease. It was not uncommon for a firefighter paramedic to regularly be exposed to blood or bodily fluids and operate in bloodstained clothing. You would never see those things done today. Today, we are challenging the fire service culture again. The importance of this can't be underemphasized. It just may save your life.
You should complete on-scene decon in the following steps. The incident commander will ensure that the decon area is established. The driver engineer will set up a decon line with low pressure from a clean water source and mark the area where to come. The driver engineer will connect the reducer to the discharge and hose to the reducer. Flake the hose out and attach the nozzle. Supply the line with high pressure from a clean water source. After you leave the building, stay on air. When possible, decon should happen while you're still protected and before you go to rehab. On your way to decon cone, the straps of the SCBA should be loosened to aid the decon process. The crews will now decon each other. The firefighter with the least amount of air will be decon first. Make sure the PPE is tightened up and no areas of the gear where water can get inside the inner climate. Avoid getting water in the top of the jacket near the neck. Only spray the collar line down. The helmet will be cleaned independently later along with the other firefighter equipment. While being rinsed with water, you should stand straight upright with your arms out to the side. This will give a quick 360 rinse from the collar line down. Next, again, work with the collar line down. Use a soft bristle brush with soap mixture to scrub the gear. Be sure to get under the pack and straps and include all possible collection points such as armpit and groin area. Rinse soap mixture off the gear from collar line down. Next, clean the boots. Then switch positions. The firefighter that was deconned will now do the same to the other firefighter, again, while both staying on air.
Go ahead.
Once you both complete the outer scrub and rinse, you can come off air and start to remove your PPE. Fire gloves should be removed first while carefully avoiding skin contact with the exterior of the gloves. Bunker gear should be removed and placed in a drop zone. This area should be downwind of the rehab area. Using the department provided wipes, clean your hands very well. Use a new set of wipes for your neck, front, and back, and the area behind your ears. Use different wipes when cleaning your entire face. Don't forget your head and hair. Lastly, use a fresh wipe for your eyes. When you release from the scene, you will bag your gear with department issued bags to decrease your exposure to off-gassing. Although it has undergone gross decon, it is recommended to still wear EMS guards. You will bag the following pieces of equipment: gloves, coats, boots, and pants, and helmet. In this order, you will bag your gear. After folding the coat, it will be placed on top of the glove, followed by the boots and pants. Lastly, clean the helmet by scrubbing the outer shell and wiping the inner soft line. Do not saturate the inner line. After cleaning, place the helmet in the bag with the top pointed toward the boot and coat. The bag will be twisted and taped closed. The remaining loose end will be folded over and taped again to complete the sealing. If a second set is not available at the scene, the firefighter hood and gloves should be exchanged for clean one sets. All tools and equipment that were used at the incident will be cleaned on the scene with a soft bristle brush and soap water mixture. The bags of gear will be placed in the apparatus. Bag PPE can be easily deployed if the need arises. Firefighters should shower within the hour when returning to the fire station.
I know for many of us, this is more than a job.
This is your family. This is your community.
The changes you make today will impact you, your family, and your colleagues.
Not just for today, but for years to come.
Together, we can change the culture and reduce our risk for cancer.
Okay, that's an overview of the decon process. And do I understand that that's not always practical in every situation? I do. But the other option is dry decon, where we brush the stuff off of our gear. It should be done when we're still on air. That's kind of like the crux of it, you know, is to keep our respiratory system protected until we're deconned the best that we can. And you know, like, I don't know your operations that well, and I don't know the ability for SCBA bottle use and exchange and what kind of protective equipment you have, but do the best that you can with what you have. And that's what we tell everybody. It's all about the little things that we do to reduce those exposures. So the next step is, after the fire, after you've deconned your equipment and you come back to the station, you need to take care of yourself before you take care of all of the equipment. Like, if you've washed the equipment on scene, that's great. But like, a dirty Halligan is not going to get cancer. So that dirty axe or the hose line that's dirty, it's not going to get cancer. You, in fact, may. So we want you to take a shower. And the way that we say it is a shower within the hour. So what we want you to do is take a shower as soon as possible and clean the toxicants off your body. The soot that is on your skin needs to come off. Get it off as best as possible, as quickly as possible, I should say. And just use soap and water, do it really well. Clean all the nooks and crannies, get everything off. And that's great. And then there's also evidence that getting a nice workout, working up a sweat or sweating, following that is beneficial. We know that we can get some of the stuff out of our bodies through sweat. So the day after the fire, you know, generally you'll smell that fire smoke, that odor, and working up a sweat and taking another shower sometimes reduces that. And then we, here in the US, we have NFPA that we follow, 1851, which requires us to wash our structural gear twice a year and after every exposure. And we do that with extractors, large washing machines. And not every department here has these. So some of them hire it out. They take in, someone comes in and gets their gear and washes it. If you have an extractor, that's great. If you don't, wash your gear the best way you can. The more rinse cycles, the better. Get it as clean as possible. I understand that it's not always practical. We have a lot of rural departments that don't have the ability to have an extractor or have somebody come pick it up, and they simply use trash cans and water to wash their gear by hand. And they do the best that they can by washing and rinsing it as many as 5 times, and then drying it and utilizing it. So that's something that I would love to learn from you, what you have. I'm going to skip exposure report tracking, because that is really just a US thing, unless you have a presumptive legislation which says that if you develop cancer, then you get a benefit from your workers' compensation and you're required to do reports. That's what we have here in the US. It is good to track your exposures in the event that you're ever asked to prove that you had an exposure related to firefighting. If you have a list of those calls that you went on where you were exposed, that would be beneficial. And there's multiple ways to do that. Here in the US, we have an app called N4s that works well. There's websites, and then there's just writing them down in a logbook as well. I am going to stop there, and then we can pick this up at this point on the 9th when I come back to finish the program. I would hope everybody could attend on the 9th, and we'll talk about early cancer detection, which is the second portion of reducing our risk. So we talked about reducing our exposures, how we're exposed and how we can reduce some of those exposures. So that will chip away at both the chances of being diagnosed with cancer. And the next portion is the early cancer detection. And I want to talk about reducing our risk of dying from cancer, because this is something that we really need to do. And we'll do that on the 9th. I am scheduled to come back on the 9th, the same time, same place. And I hope to see you all then. Leah, do we have any questions first?
Thank you so much, Russell. Yeah, just please, if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute at any time, and just speak up, say what your question is. But thank you so much, Russell, and thank you just for being willing to not only come today, but also coming, like you said, next week. I know we are all looking forward to continuing just to learn about this and just how important it is to learn about these preventative things that we can do to not get cancer in such a sadly prevalent cancer field. So thank you so much for that today. And I just want to remind everybody that you will be getting a certificate if you stayed for 75% of the meeting today, and that we will be posting this up on our YouTube channel if you would like to view it in the future. And also just to use the same registration link that you used today next week so you can view next week's training as well. Thank you very much.